Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar titled The Best New Capabilities for Backup and Replication in Veeam Availability Suite v10. Oof, that was a bit of a mouthful. Our speaker today is Paul Jensen, a lead instructor at ExitCertified. Paul has taught IT training courses for the past 9 years. Wearing multiple hats, he has been our lead Veeam instructor for the past 4 years. In addition to teaching VMware and Nutanix courses, earning him the reputation of a trusted authority among the IT operations professionals he teaches. Before we get started with the webinar, I'm going to talk about the functionalities. During the session, everyone's microphones will be muted. So if you have any questions or comments, please enter them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. You should see a little Q&A icon. We'll have a dedicated question and answer session at the end of the session, or if we see the questions during the presentation, we'll try and get them answered. We are recording the webinar today, and we'll send a copy out to each and every one of you by the end of the week. I'm going to share a promo at the end of the session where you can save up to $250 on your public training, so stick around to learn a little bit more about that. All right, now let's get started. Paul, you can take it away.
Thanks, Michelle. All right, good morning, everybody, or afternoon, depending on where you're at, I guess. As Michelle said, this is a bit of a mouthful for a webinar title here. What we're going to do today and what my intention is to really, again, as the title says, share with you some of the neat new features and capabilities that version 10 has brought us. We're not going to be able to hit on every new feature. We have an hour-ish, a little less, to go through all of this, but I do want to touch on and talk about a number of the different new capabilities of the new Availability Suite version 10. This is going to focus mostly on backup and replication. Most of the newer features that were introduced with v1, which is the other half, if you will, of Availability Suite, came out really in 9.5. Not a whole lot of new stuff there, so we will be focusing on backup and replication. So the first new capability is probably one of the most looked forward to. Couldn't leave this out, was the NAS backup. So Veeam with version 10 now will directly back up your file shares, your network attached storage. You have a couple of new concepts here, actually a number of new concepts, and I'm going to demo these or show you where some of these are. So we have now something called a file proxy. I'll show you what that is. I'll talk a little bit as we go through this about the cache repository. That's another new concept, and it handles, and the reason we have that is it helps handle the retention, which is a new method of retention. We are not doing full VMs. So for those of you that have been doing backups with Veeam, or if you haven't, and even if you're familiar with other backup applications, we aren't using the concepts of a full or an incremental backup with NAS backup. It's a completely different concept. So I'll talk a little bit about that, and I'll show where that is configured. So let's go ahead, pop into my home lab here, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. So the first thing is the concept of a file backup proxy. This is a new construct here. We have our regular backup proxies for our VMs, but we now have a file backup proxy. It's pretty much the same concept as a VM backup proxy, except you are dealing with files. Still have concurrent tasks, still have that same concept of sizing. We still have the traffic rules. All of that still applies, but this is designated specifically to files. And that's because we're backing up files differently. When I add a file server, and we're going to go out and we use the file backup proxy to scan, and then we are going to use what is called a CRC. The CRC check goes to the cache repository, goes to its memory. This is how we determine what's changed. We're not doing, hey, there's no change block tracking. There's no comparison in that regard. We compare folders, and then we compare CRCs on folders and files, and that tells us what has changed and what needs to be pulled. That's done, and that's why the cache repository is needed. The proxy processes concurrent tasks, and that's another thing to keep in mind. When we deal with this, we are not dealing with concurrent tasks. We can't do it by drive, like we did with disks, with virtual machines. So it is by file share. So one concurrent task is the whole file share. You might want to consider breaking that up into multiple shares or possibly multiple jobs to get multiple concurrent tasks on those large shares. So the cache repository is any backup repository. It is designated, and when you create your share, you tell it which repository, which standard repository you want to store that with. You can make a dedicated one. You can use one that's already in existence. You will want to keep that close. So the other part of this is here. There's my free NAS backup, and that comes down to our retention policy. So we can choose our files and folders, but here is our retention policy. This is very different again. With the basic licensing structure, you get to have a short-term retention policy, and that is based off of here. Let me zoom in. That might be a little bit of an eye chart. So down here, we can choose any repository. It's days or months. Again, depending on how good your eyes are. Mine aren't quite as good as they used to be. And you can select however many, up to 999 of those. Don't know as I would do that, as you want. If you have Enterprise Plus licensing, you can go up to and increase this with a long-term storage policy, which is as things move off of here, they get migrated to off this retention policy, they move to this, and this becomes months and years. But that is a additional license feature. The other cool part about that is we can now use object storage for that. It does not have to be object storage for long-term only, but it can be. So I can do this off-site. Okay, so why don't I use a Scaleout? Because if you do choose a Scaleout repository for this, we do ignore the capacity or object storage tier for that. So just keep in mind, if you are deploying this, if you're using it, it's a great tool. It is completely different. We're not using that same concept. I can say X number of days, X number of months. I can also, for my short term, I can double it. There is the option to add secondary repositories. So when I finish the first one, I make that backup. It can copy it immediately to another one with another short-term repository. Or so you can simply add that, and you can set a custom retention policy as well. So I can keep my most recent ones on much higher performing storage and move those additional ones to possibly lower performance storage with a longer retention policy. So as you can see, we did that by days or months. But when I get to the schedule, I can make the schedule as often as I want. I've made my schedule every 12 hours. So I'm getting twice a day. Now, does that mean that I'm actually having that many backups? No. I'm running them, but if nothing has changed, I don't actually add anything more to my repository. I don't increment up that number of backup jobs. So what will happen, I'll go ahead and cancel this because we're already there, is I can come in here. Let's go down to my disk, find that. You can see which ones I've done. And you can see here, I've run them fairly consistently since the evening of the 26th, 27th, 28th. And I get 2 a day, even one already this morning. However, you can see we have 12 restore points. But if I chose to restore files and folders, and by the way, I've only edited one file on this. Okay, so we'll show you that file here really quick. Even though I've only edited the one file, and I may have so many restore points, we can actually select to, I'm going to go ahead and select to keep. It's a little test file. Oh, I didn't choose the date. Cancel that. Sorry about that. There is an option. There we go. Yeah, I know. Always the fun part of a live demo. There we go. I can choose all times, defaults to the most recent. But now you can see I have 7 different copies of that VM. 12 incrementals, or 12 instances, but the only VM that changed, I only have 7 because that's the number of changes there were. We don't store anything for nothing. This also is a very different file format. There is no, incremental, forward incremental, reverse incremental, what you would think of as for a traditional. This is all stored as what is termed as blob storage. It's almost like an object storage. You have multiple 64 meg blobs that fill up all of the different files. So it's not something you can go out and browse like we would do, for instance, with an older type of VM-based backup. So that's pretty much the NAS in a nutshell. Again, have a lot of different things. We will not actually move anything. So one other little point about short-term, long-term, nothing gets moved to long-term unless it has an expiration. So from the short-term, so the short-term actually goes through and it gets removed based on retention, or if it gets deleted. So if I never change a file, it never moves to long-term. That file is always the most recent one. It's a little, they say a little different. And that's why, more than anything, I want to bring that up. So some very cool things there. And that's our NAS backup. Brand new, can be NFS, it can be SMB, you can add a Windows server, you can add a Linux server. All of the above. A little caveat on these before I jump into our next little section. There is no snapshot. So when you do a backup, if there is a file locked, it may skip it. That will show up in the report at the end. So we're not quiescing anything. If you're familiar with the Veeam backup of a VM, where we quiesce, we make sure everything is nice and nothing's in the middle of a write. We're not able to do that on a NAS. So beyond that, even if you don't need to back up a NAS, there have been some really, really good features brought up into backup and backup copy jobs. So backup jobs have additional retention policy options on them now. Backup copy jobs now have new modes. I want to again show you some of these things. So we're going to go ahead once more over into our backups here, our VBR system. I'm going to open up my next thing. And I'm going to show you, I've got 3 VMware backup jobs going on here. I'll talk a little bit about AHV as we have time at the end. But I've got 2 backup copy jobs based off of this backup job. I'm going to go ahead and start that as we're talking here. So Popping in new features of the backup jobs. So, bring up our edit here. Again, all deals with retention, policies, and GFS, which is new for backup. You used to have to do a backup copy job. Now you can do it with a backup copy, or you can do it, or I should say, you can do it with a backup job. It's a little different with a backup job as a backup copy. But before we do that, I'm going to talk about something really cool here. It's the new retention policy. Traditionally, it's what we have it set up here, 7 restore points. But there's a new pull down, and I can make that 7 days. So if I'm running a backup job, like I was with my file job, twice a day, 3 times a day, whatever happens to make sense in your environment, I don't have to do the math if I need to make sure my retention policy is a week, 2 weeks. I can simply change this to days, and it will keep all retention all backup points through that many days. So if I had 3, I needed it to be a week, I don't need to do the simple-ish math of 21. I can simply say, I need 7 days, regardless of what my schedule is. So that's a new feature. Nice feature. I know it's been requested, at least in my classes, by a number of students. So, I like bringing that one up for that reason. The other option is down here. I've been asked this one, why can't I do grandfather, father, son, GFS? So for those of you not familiar with GFS, this allows me to set up so that I can keep a full backup on a weekly, monthly, yearly schedule for that long-term retention. So here you can see I can choose any given ones of these. I can set this up, on just one of them, and it can be any one of them. I can choose what, time of the month, first, last. I can choose a day of the week. I can choose what month of the year. As I choose these, they do relate to each other. If I choose a lower tier, so I choose a weekly, I will pick the same full that fits with my monthly. So the weekly, the first week, if I choose the first, this full will be the monthly's full for this first week of that month. So it will use one full backup to meet both those criteria. If I'm only doing 1 week, then the monthly will still be there at that first week in the month, and then that weekly will keep moving through. So again, we're stacking these as we go through. We do not stack weeklies and yearlies if those are the only 2. They get done on their own little schedules. Only get stacked if you are all the way through. So you can, again, set this up, and this does not preclude you going into a backup copy job and setting up a GFS on that. These are, again, 2 separate things. I want to keep a backup copy. I want to keep a backup. All this is very separate concepts. Backup job stays with the backup copy, which is where I'm going next, stays with the backup copy. Again, I'm not going to save any of those changes. So let's see, I think I've got nope, it's just that one. Closed the wrong window there. Backups. So here's my backup job. That's this backup job here. Here's all the instances I have. I also have 2 backup copy jobs. And there are 2 flavors now of backup copy. One is immediate, and one is periodic. So let's show you those. So here we've got, let me pull that out. our immediate copy job, and we've got our periodic copy job. They're off the same backup job. So as I look at my immediate job, I simply come in here, and this allows me to select immediate. Once I choose immediate, that's this backup job. I can't do both of them in the same job. Doesn't really make sense. And again, I can choose which objects. I chose both of the VMs. I can choose where I'm sending this. I can still do my GFS. This is still restore points to keep, not days. So there is a difference, and this is an important concept. This is the other reason I want to touch on this. So at this time with Veeam, I'm going to show you what this looks like when I've done this immediate. So when I do an immediate, let's go out of here. This job has already kicked off. I did my backup copy. This does a job immediately. It is doing it as the files are completed. Now, this has multiple files. It has a very long retention policy. It is a standard forward incremental. I'm keeping everything. The backup, immediate backup copy job follows its retention policy religiously, and I'll show you what I mean, as well as it does the job, as it shows here, as soon as any file is ready. Now, this is a per VM backup file. My copy job is a per job file. So this is going to have much fewer files because instead of 2 VMs, well, it has both VMs, but they are being stored in one file each. But I want to point something out here. This is the gotcha moment. I said that we're following exactly the retention policy. So if you're familiar with Veeam, if I do a regular forward incremental, my retention policy is a minimum retention policy because I have to be able to restore the whole thing. At this time, Veeam's immediate job holds just the copies. So I only have a full backup here. That just ran. All these are incrementals. Can't go to these without the full backup that was prior to them. So you need to make sure you're setting your retention policy. I did this intentionally so I could show you this. You need to make sure that the immediate copy jobs retention policy will handle all of the retention points that might be on your backup job, the base backup job. Should not be really an issue for forever forward, reverse, but for a regular standard forward incremental, you can run into issues. But again, we're doing an exact copy of what's here, except for the fact in this case, we're moving it to per job. If I come out and I do my standard periodic, you will see, if I show you the periodic, this is set to do every other day. So it's waiting, and it isn't going to kick off until that time frame, and this will always be a forever forward. So it will just keep moving forward and forward and forward as it's standard. So those are your features, if you will, the changes here. Talk a little bit of GFS, days versus points. Then we have those two copy jobs, immediate and periodic. Moving on, we're going to talk about a few of the component enhancements, specifically some new features with the Scaleout backup repository. A brand new feature for VMware proxies. We can now use a Linux proxy and instant VM recovery from any, sorry, I mistyped that. It should be from any to VMware. doesn't matter what the origin backup is, we can do an instant recovery to VMware now. That's another one of those features that people were waiting for. So again, let's take a look at this. So I'm going to start out there with our Scaleout repository down here in our backup infrastructure. So here we've got one Scaleout repository. I've got some capacity tier, performance tier. And here is where we get, all of this hasn't changed. This is where we get our first change. We can now do, and this is nothing to do with backup copy jobs. It gets a little confusing now. Backup copy jobs have an immediate job and a, periodic. This Scaleout repositories now have kind of the same thing. We can now say, as you make a copy, as you make a backup to your performance tier, I want you to copy it immediately out to the capacity tier. Effectively, I now have, either through a backup copy job or through Scaleout, the ability to meet that 3-2-1 rule, the 3 copies of my data, 2 media types, and if I choose to do an off-site object storage out to, say, a cloud provider, I now have it off-site. I can put delays on when that gets copied out, so I can limit if I so desire, but it immediately handles this. And it also still works with what we've been doing before, migrate backups out there over time, ones that become inactive over time. This really just determines on, instead of waiting, we now are copying everything out there, and based off of, again, a retention policy, how long do I want to wait before it expires and we remove that. So this is really cool. I love this. I remember seeing this. If you had a chance to go to Veeam last year, if you haven't gone to it this year because it's in 2 weeks virtually, you may have seen this. This encryption, if you've heard, so one of the things I will be talking about here in just a second is immutability. This is not immutability. This is encrypting your data. Immutability means that at the S3 object storage, S3 compatible, Azure eventually, storage, nobody can change it. Support on their end can't change it. You can't change it. Nobody can change it. It is there, effectively giving you an air gap. Not truly air gap, but nobody can edit it. So, for all intents and purposes, it helps with those ransomware virus issues. Now, that isn't set in your repository here, your Scaleout repository. That is set per object storage. So when you configure an object storage repository, here's my credentials, moving on, and you set up a bucket. Where am I storing this? If it supports this API, and currently the only partner that supports this is Amazon S3. I know they're working on it with Azure as well as other partners. It's an API, open API that they just have to make sure is available. You can make your backups immutable. Again, this means nobody has the ability to change those. We'll use Amazon just because it's the only partner that is currently available. You call Amazon, they can't change those. They can't edit them. They are immutable. So again, some ransomware comes out, tries to reach out, scramble those, they can't do anything to them. Nobody can. It is locked. You'll notice it does default to 30 days. You can minimize that to 1 day. And of course you can go up to, forget the limit on here. So 90 days. So you can go way up. 99 days is your limit. This limit has a buffer built in. Veeam puts a 10-day buffer in no matter what this is. So mentally prepare yourself if you create this, that if I put in the default of 30 days, it's actually 40. Kind of an important thing to be aware of. Also, this only affects from the point you set it. So if I have backups already out there and I set this to 30 days, they're still at 0. There is no way to change those. Going forward, the next job that moves up there is immutable. Moving forward from that point, if I then decide later I want 60 days, the ones that are 30 days are 30 days. 60 days is going forward. If I set this or disable this, it's the ones that are already immutable are immutable. So changes are only made from the point of change. They don't get retroactively applied. But that's where that is. Unfortunately, the one that I'm using here does not support that API. So again, I will just cancel because, well, it doesn't really help. So I hit the wrong thing there. So the other thing that is new, again, is our backup proxy. We now have the ability to have a Linux backup proxy. This is a brand new feature for adding a VMware proxy. If you're familiar with Hyper-V, Hyper-Vs are on host. They're part of the Hyper-V server. But for VMware, we can now use a Linux VM for this. Same concepts as far as concurrent tasks, all of that. This is for VM backups only. A file proxy must still be Windows currently. And the only option we have here, oh, didn't mean to go next. Meant to highlight something. Again, the fun parts of going through here. The only option we have here, as I'm waiting for this, and I'll show you, is I can't choose the transport mode. There is one transport mode, and that is virtual appliance mode. Everything else is the same, but if you'll notice, this is virtual appliance mode, or hot add, if you're familiar with the different terms. So as you add new, as you do this backup, it must be able to see the storage that the VM is residing on. However, again, great for those environments that maybe I don't want to pay another license at a robo. Maybe I am mainly a Linux office, Linux shop. Still need VBR as a Windows machine, and we still use the Microsoft SQL database, but I can now start using my proxies as Linux-based proxies. So, very cool thing there. And then last, but certainly not least, one of the very neat options is here I've got, let's pick up a AHV. As you can see, I can come in and I can do an instant VM recovery from this VM that is running on AHV. Out here, I'm going to change that. Choose a single host. And that's good. I don't really care about the rest of that. And we need to set up a network, otherwise it won't work. And of course, we can then, customize BIOS, all sorts of other things here. What I can go next, I can choose the write cache to a specific location. Go ahead and use that one. And then I can, connect the network as I choose. I can power it on if I want. Go ahead and click finish. And now this VM that is currently running on AHV, it's still running on AHV. Oh, there's my, move that one off. Pick the wrong window there. You can see here it's holding 3. That's the VM that is out here. But actually, as it says, I do have 3. 2 of them are running on VMware. But I can bring that up. That will show up out here in my VMware environment. As you can see, it does have to do some conversion. It's not as fast as an instant VM recovery that would be running on VMware already, because it's not got that VMDK format. So it does have to do a few things here in order to get that to show up. So my VMware is logging in. There we go. Maybe. And over here, you can see I've got holding 3. Watch a little console. It's up, it's running, waiting for login. Again, very quick, very easy to actually kick those off. Doesn't matter what the source is. We can do this from agent, which is probably where most of you might do these things from. If I've done a backup of an agent, from an agent physical box, hey, I need that back up and running, but I don't have another physical box to get it out on right now. Let's get it up and running temporarily inside a virtual environment, provided we have access to all the requirements. And then we can go out and eventually restore to a physical environment if necessary. So very cool. Again, anything. It doesn't matter if it was an Amazon. It doesn't matter if it was Azure, Hyper-V, AHV. We can restore to anything with the instant VM recovery into VMware. So question, well, we'll hold off on questions. That's an old habit of mine. Bad habit of mine. So I want to switch gears for this last little bit here. And this is specific to AHV because this is a new integration Veeam has introduced between version 10 and AHV. And as a Nutanix instructor and a Veeam instructor, I do get these questions, and this is probably one of, again, those areas that doesn't get addressed very often. So we now have the ability from Veeam, VBR, backup and replication, to add and deploy an actual AHV host and proxy. This used to have to be done inside AHV, and then you would add that proxy and add that communication and connect them. I'll talk a little bit about backup job configuration. This is still done through the proxy. However, anything else can now be done through the VBR system. So, one more time, back to the demo. Oh, that's still, there's our still running job. Okay, close that. It'll come back up here. And I'm gonna choose one of our old ones here. So, if I want to do a new backup job, well, let's do this first. I should start here. I can come in here and I can add a new AHV server. This is 192.7. Yes, if I had it's not set up as fully qualified, so, you know, using an IP, do as I say, not as I do. FQDN is better. So it's going to go ahead and go through and add it. I can create a NFR, a file level restore. So that's what this is for. It allows me to deploy on the fly a file level recovery, a little tiny VM, to restore files back into my AHV VMs. And then as it goes through, it's going to deploy that, and then it's going to prompt me to create a proxy. Now, much like a baking show, this takes a while. So I'm not going to go through all that. If I want to finish all this, and create a proxy here, because the proxy will take a bit to do. So rather than do that, it does prompt you to create one. We're going to just pop up here, and I have a proxy. This proxy does have to have resolution on it, DNS resolution. Because what's going to happen is we're going to add it in to a backup job automatically. And in order to do that, we can't use periods with Veeam. So I can't use an IP address here for the VM name. But we deploy the proxy, same concept. This is a virtual machine sitting inside AHV. I can change my number of concurrent tasks. If I up this, it will up the number of virtual processors and amount of memory applied. It will reconfigure that VM. Again, you want to see it. It is actually this VM right here. It is deployed with that, but the name inside Veeam that it can resolve to is the AHV proxy. And it is actually set up again to be backed up, but it's backing it up as what they call a protection domain-based backup. I'm not going to get into protection domains in here because that's a AHV concept, not a Veeam concept. However, once I've got all of that, I am able to create a new Nutanix backup. The backup job has to be created from the proxy, which is a web interface. So here you can see backup job. You know, we can give it a name, demo1, demo description, and I can choose a backup, or I can choose it to run snapshots inside AHV, or what they call a protection domain snapshot job, again, within AHV. Plain old snapshot job is just going to take snaps of whatever VM I tell it to. I can choose my folding 3, and I can add it, and then I can choose a schedule. I can put any schedule I want. If it is a regular backup job, it is a forever forward or a forward incremental. That is one of the, if you will, limitations here, but not a big limitation. Now, once I've got a backup job, which I have here, I can create any kind of backup copy job I want off of this. So there's my backup copy job of the test VM backup job. Again, now this particular, there is a limitation here. We are only able to do the periodic at this point. There is no immediate option with the AHV yet. So again, a little bit of a limitation there, but not much. This is what we've been used to up to version 10. But now I can create these. I can choose to restore. I can restore it to wherever I want to. I can restore to EC2, Azure. I can restore to VMware. I can also restore, obviously, to AHV. Any one of these. I can also, one more little thing here, restore to VM restore anything, including, there's my VMware folding ones. I can restore those, if you look up here, to AHV. I can't instant recover those to AHV, but I can restore anything to AHV. And as you might run into more and more Nutanix people, partners, the nice part about this is your old backups are still available to be used even if they migrate to this new hypervisor. So a couple of really cool options for this. So that covers pretty much everything I wanted to cover as far as a demo. Are there any questions out there? I haven't seen anything pop up in the Q&A yet.
Thank you so much, Paul. I will just reiterate, inviting anybody to ask some questions now. Check out that Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen and post any questions you may have. While those questions do come in, I'm going to talk about our running promos. So right now we have a summer promo that can save you up to $250 on your public training, up to $2,500 on your private training. There are some details that follow along with this promo. I'm going to post that information in the chat window for everyone now. So you should see a link over to the promo details as well as the promo code. I'm also excited to announce that our June 16th Veeam Availability Suites V10 class is guaranteed to run. So apply that promo to this class that's guaranteed to run. We also have our June 25th Veeam Certified Engineer class also guaranteed to run. When you're looking at our schedule on ExitCertified.com, look for a GTR symbol next to the course to know that your class is guaranteed to run. We'll give a couple of moments for any questions to come in.
I do want to also point out that June 25th class is the Advanced Design and Optimization course. It is a 2-day course, so it is considered a universal course. It applies to 9 and 10.
If there are no questions, then I would just like to thank everyone for taking some time out of your day to learn a little bit more about Veeam. Paul, thank you so much for your time and those live demos, very informative. We are recording this session and we'll send a copy out to everyone that registered by the end of the week. You'll also find the links to those promo details in that recording. I'll post them in the chat once more time before we head off. Go ahead, grab those links in the chat now.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, everyone, as well.
Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.